I'm Michelle Markle, Youth Manager of Voc Rehab, and we are here to talk about the Pre-ETS contract. I'm so excited. I'm so excited that we have this growing team of people that's going to help us manage, support, implement the contracts. So we have our youth service coordinators. That is CJ Webb, Michelle Pruden, Desiree Berry, and Derek Hill. And they are assigned to the color coordinated regions on here. And I have their contact information at the end of this presentation. Those folks are, think of like your programming side, all the services, authorizing services to students, figuring out how this works within your school system. They're the program side of contract administration. And then Francie Detweiler, whose first day is today, day one, first day, is the youth contracts coordinator statewide. That's the position that I was holding prior to this. So that's going to be what I call like back end or all fiscal kind of related things. And we have a nice, almost full team, one more in recruitment for Lincoln, Benton, Lynn, and Lane. So should have updates for you hopefully soon on those. So while I am talking today, the majority of the time, this team that you're looking at here is your first go-to with contract questions as we roll forward. And we know we invited people who have no YTP contract to this session. So we're going to start with some really basic information today. Like, what are Pre-ETS? This is a Pre-ETS contract, right? So what are these things that we call Pre-ETS? They are pre-employment transition services. And I just put up here that many of us for many years have spoken very loosely about Pre-ETS and like, schools do Pre-ETS or we do Pre-ETS and they do Pre-ETS. I put the citation below for anybody who really wants to look at this, the 34 CFR. But really, formally, Pre-ETS are a VR service that have a whole bunch of rules around qualification, funding, and reporting. And so we're getting in line with that formal requirement of all things Pre-ETS with these new contracts. This contract will include 2 things that are called Pre-ETS coordination activities and the 5 required Pre-ETS services. So there's a more expansive definition, but this contract contains 2 Pre-ETS coordination activities and 5 required Pre-ETS services. The Pre-ETS coordination activities are the top 2 bullets. This includes working with local employers to develop work opportunities, work-based learning opportunities, internships, all of that kind of stuff for students with disabilities. It could be summer employment, other different opportunities throughout the year, and apprenticeships. It also will include working with schools to coordinate and ensure the provision of pre-employment transition services. And this can be like your student meetings. This can be family nights. This can be transition fairs and different things like that. These 2 activities are not always directly connected to a specific student. So it's a nice way to use your time in the contract if things have not been pre-authorized by VR and they fit into one of these top 2 bullets. You don't need prior approval from VR unless the activity requires overnight travel. Okay. And in this contract, up to 40% of your total contract hours can make up these 2 bullets. Okay. All right. And then we have the 5 required Pre-ETS services. These are the earliest set of services and activities for a student with a documented disability eligible for or potentially eligible for vocational rehabilitation. It is for students who are ages 14 to 21, and they must be enrolled in a secondary or post-secondary school. They're short-term in nature, and they're intended to help identify career interests, to narrow, refine career goals. There must be prior approval by VR following a series of steps that will document all of the approval in order to access and bill for these hours. And these hours must account for at least 60% of your total contract. I am seeing somebody in the waiting room would, hold on here. It keeps trying to come back in. I don't know if one of the youth team can try and help let Eileen in somehow. I don't know why my computer won't let me let her in. All right, moving along. So I'm going to give a quick overview of these. I know it's going to be a review for many, but again, we have new folks on the call here who may not have seen these before. So job exploration counseling, work-based learning experience, self-advocacy, workplace readiness, and post-secondary transition and counseling. So what is job exploration? This is, I have no idea what I want to do. Where do I start? This is interest inventories. This is going to visit specific places and really just thinking about the pros and the cons and the details and the possibilities of all of the different job options that our youth have. Work-based learning is typically a little bit more like interactive. So that can be a guest speaker, mock interviews, actual job shadows, paid or unpaid internships, things like that. Instruction in self-advocacy is just helping our youth understand their strengths and their needs and speaking to their needs and speaking up for themselves and ensuring that when we're talking about post-school, that it really is the individual's dreams and hopes that we're aiming for, not necessarily like the parent or the support networks. So that's a big piece of this Pre-ETS. And then we also have workplace readiness. And these are just about, you know, all of the things that make us successful employees that are transferable, right? So it's time management and it's refining social skills for the workplace, and it's learning general work expectations, spoken, unspoken, written, unwritten. So all of those types of things, all within employment orientation. And then there's one, and the formal name is Counseling on Opportunities for Enrollment in Comprehensive Transition or Post-Secondary Education Programs at Institutions of Higher Education. And we often just shorthand that to counseling on post-secondary. And this is just about looking into all of the things that are available and as far as training goes post-secondary, right? So is that a college? Is it a training program? Is it an apprenticeship? What are these things? Is it on-the-job training? And then becoming somebody who can make an informed choice about what their next steps are. Through all of these things, you'll hear us say it over and over again, VR is an individual service. So we always want to see the individual in these things and help them find their path. Now, do all of these sound familiar to our school partners? Of course they do, because schools provide stuff like this all of the time. Schools provide college and career readiness opportunities, courses, events, experiences. There's graduation requirements, CTE and STEM activities, classes, courses, course requirements, IEP services. Pre-ETS cannot take the place of or duplicate any services which are the responsibility of the school district to provide, and rather Pre-ETS may only enhance them. This next thing is a really big deal for all of us to learn together. VR has the sole responsibility to determine what that is and cannot delegate that to other entities. So all decisions affecting eligibility for VR services, the nature and the scope of available services and the provision of the services, only VR people employed by VR, the agency, can determine that. And we have to document that, as well as the allocation and expenditure of any VR funds. And there's the little CFR down there if people want to look that up. Okay, so there's lots of questions about this. Many of you may have heard us talk about VR can't supplant, or VR can't take the place of IDEA, or we can't duplicate services. So how is that going to be determined? It'll be determined on a case-by-case situation. And this is the 3-step process that we want people to be thinking about. 3 steps, 3 steps, 3 steps. First, we determine the purpose of the service. If it's for the purpose of defining, refining, or meeting an employment outcome, and it results in information that can be used to inform an employment goal or service, then it can be a Pre-ETS. If it's solely for the purpose of educational attainment or to meet the requirements of an IEP, an individualized education program, then it would be a duplication of school services and would not be a Pre-ETS. Okay, number 2, step 2, determine who customarily provides the service. Transition services are a shared responsibility between LEAs, which are local education associations, agencies, I want to say associations, and VR. So we share this, and we want to determine how VR services can enhance school services, not take the place of CTE, STEM, IDEA, other things like that, but how can we enhance those? And consider the number 3, step 3, consider eligibility for school services. If the student has a 504 plan or is protected under 504, or an otherwise documented disability and does not have an IEP, then VR is the primary provider of Pre-ETS. That one's almost like a no-brainer, right? It's just when it gets down to IEP that we have to, or IEP services and IDEA services, that we have to look a lot more closely. And then finally, if VR determines the request does not constitute a duplication of service, then VR authorizes the services based on the individual need. And what I want you all to hear from me and from us is that we want to find the ways that students can get these services legitimately in the way that is responsible, in the way that we're required to do it. Okay. So what is this Pre-ETS contract that we're talking about? Version 1. I put version 1 in here because this contract will continue to evolve over time. This is what's called an ORS 190 intergovernmental agreement between vocational rehabilitation and school districts, including education service districts. Providers of the Pre-ETS are employees of the school district and will provide VR services for which the district may then turn around and bill Voc Rehab for. Even though it's an intergovernmental agreement, that ORS 190, what that it basically allows us to circumvent the procurement process. We're both intergovernmental agencies. We're trying to get services to our shared population. It's not a competitive bid like it was in the past. So there's not this big, massive application and scoring and all of that stuff. It's just a direct arrangement between our 2 entities, but it is still treated like a contract. We are going to be using a fee for service structure. The hourly fee districts may bill VR for services is $50 per hour for both the Pre-ETS coordination activities as well as the 5 required Pre-ETS services. And another disclaimer, one more time, this Pre-ETS contract will continue to evolve. This is new for all of us. We are giving it our very best shot with lots and lots and lots of guidance and feedback from our technical assistance providers and from our federal oversight partners. There's going to be, we've already engaged in a contract for a formal analysis of rates and services. It's now an annual requirement. That analysis will inform future contracts, rates, and rate structure. This contract will go July 1, 2024 to September 30, 2025. Okay, budget planning. People have lots of questions about how to plan for this budget. And here are a couple of things to be thinking about. Districts can think about the dollars from this contract as a revenue stream. So everything's going to be pre-authorized. Reports are going to come in with evidence. You've done it. You've earned the dollars. We pay you, the dollars are yours to use however you want to use them. Okay. But districts may want to identify a dollar amount that will cover a proportion of programming costs and then translate that into an amount of hours. All right. This is kind of weird. It gets a little tricky for our heads to think about. So here is an example. Sunshine District aims to provide $100,000 worth of services in this contract. Maybe that 100,000 is what it takes to cover the cost that I was used to getting in the prior grant, or 2/3 of it at least, right? So I'm going to start with something there. How much am I hoping to generate from this contract? And then 100,000 divided by $50 equals 2,000 total hours. So in the contract, I would be, if I'm the person in Sunshine District, I'd be requesting 2,000 hours in the contract. Up to 800 of the hours may be these Pre-ETS coordination activities that don't need prior approval from VR. And at a minimum, 1,200 of the hours must be used for the direct service, the 5 required Pre-ETS services that do need pre-authorization from VR. In addition to hours, there are still some extra budget line items. Travel is one. Travel, the time I'm in a car going here and going there can still be billed at $50 per hour. Districts may bill VR for mileage, lodging, and per diem with prior VR approval at rates that align with the state of Oregon travel policy. We've provided the link to that there. And using the GSA rates, which are the U.S. General Administrative Services rates. There's a link there. And we are now going to have to require receipts for lodging and mileage logs, etc. Okay, so who knows GSA rate right now? The standard rate is at 107 a night, $107 a night. So that's what we state employees are able to be reimbursed up to. District by district, it might be different, but this contract means that you have to align with what we're doing at the state level. Same with mileage. We have to use that federal mileage reimbursement rate. Supplies, there's still a supply budget line item. These are only for students, only when necessary to provide or access the Pre-ETS with prior VR approval. So of course you're like, what am I supposed to do for a supply budget? What am I supposed to do? I don't know. I have no idea if everything's going to be individualized and based on VR approval. My advice here would be to kind of aim big, because it's going to be based on actual costs that VR is going to approve. Having you all have some supplies budget means that you'll just be able to purchase things faster and get reimbursed for them with our approval, instead of waiting for us to purchase them and then get them to you, right? Student wages, if you are planning to pay students, still, if you've already been doing that, or if this is something new that you want to look at, we do have that in there. We would consider things at minimum wage or higher in competitive integrated settings with VR prior approval, because it is a work-based learning experience, right? So this will be one of the things that we have to approve ahead of time. Oh, student wages, you say? So what about our paid summer work contracts, also known as RFA, CJ's paid summer work awesomeness? Many districts have both YTP and RFA contracts currently with Voc Rehab. Beginning summer 2025, so not this summer, but next summer, these contracts will be merging into one. As your district plans forward and you intend to continue offering paid work and you apply for the contract right now, you need to be thinking about next summer and project your costs for next summer's program into this contract request, okay? And paid student work can happen year-round. It doesn't just have to be in the summertime. Okay, that was a lot. So we're going to take about 20, 30 seconds for you to write down your most important questions, but we're not going to take the questions till the very end. Gives me a chance to take a breath too. All right. How will we be managing all of this stuff? This is a lot, right? There's documentation of each step that has to happen at a much more granular level than we've ever been used to in our Y2P contracts, at least. So what we have is called the Pre-ETS dashboard. And the dashboard is a communication tool with real-time and automated alerts between contract providers, school districts, and VR. It's a one-stop for resources and tracking of services and expenditures so that we're all looking at the same thing and following and tracking the same thing. And it's also a contract management tool that documents all of the required steps necessary to meet the federal requirements of a Pre-ETS contract. That includes all of the requests, all of the approvals, and all of the reporting. Payment, all that kind of stuff. So what does it look like? What does this dashboard look like? Every single school district that ends up with a contract is going to have their own unique dashboard. And that dashboard is going to include contact information for your contract administrator. It'll be links to like a help thing, just general overview, links to resources. This is kind of like just the general front page. So you all have one dashboard, and then regionally we have regional dashboards, and we have a statewide dashboard within VR to track and manage and follow all of this stuff. All of our requests are going to be on the dashboard. So if you have a request for, I'd like to provide this student some self-advocacy time, a little bit of information, you fill all that out there. If you want more hours than we've approved or authorized initially, there's a request for more hours. There's a little help request, which is like, help me, I need help. I just don't know what I'm doing. That'll go directly to your youth services coordinator, and they'll pick up the phone and help you out. So all the requests that we're building in will be on this dashboard. You'll also be able to see all of the service approvals. So here is an example. Student Bill and student Brown. You can see that they have 15, Bill has 15 hours of job exploration counseling authorized. Last name Brown has 10. As you go down, and so services have been authorized when they're provided and when they're paid, it will track each of those against the total per student and then overall total per contract as well. So we're building in these reporting features that will help us all track and stay on the same page about what's been provided and what is remaining. And then all of the reports that are required by your site will also be built in here. So there's a monthly report of services. This will take place of our all former versions of Pre-ETS reporting. This is what this will become, and there's the ability to upload evidence and information as well. And that was for the 60% hours, the 5 required Pre-ETS. There's also a report called the Pre-ETS Coordination Activities Report that just tells us how you're using that 40% of your time in the contract for things that don't have to be pre-approved by VR, but still have to be accounted for. And again, what if I need some help? I mean, you can always email or call your youth service coordinator or Francie, the youth contract coordinator. But this is just a nice little feature too. If you happen to save this on your desktop, you can just always put in a little help ticket. And we get alerts. We get alerts when you contact us. You get alerts when we contact you via email. Okay, so here's the summary of these things: required requests and reports. We're going into a monthly rhythm, everybody, not quarterly. This is monthly, and it's a lot. So you have to request pre-ETS. There's a request for additional pre-ETS hours, travel request, supplier request. And then there's reporting features. So there's the pre-ETS service report, pre-ETS coordination activity report, mileage log upload, receipts and expense report upload. So all of that stuff's built right there into the dashboard. Prior approval and reporting requirements. So for each of these requests and approvals, here's our rhythm. Using the dashboard that we create and manage and everything in VR, a request is submitted in completion. VR is alerted automatically upon submission, and then we determine the request meets the requirement of the contract. We identify the need for the purchase. This applies to both services and other associated costs, such as supplies or travel. And then we authorize what is determined to be allowable, necessary, and reasonable. Oops, I was going to put a CFR reference in there that I didn't. But any of you who want to read that particular CFR, let me know and I'll send you the link. Or maybe I'll update it before we post it online. That's probably smarter. And then the district provides the services and reports hours of services provided, along with documentation no less than monthly, and provides receipts for any authorized additional expenses. So there's a lot going on within a month now. Many might wonder why we have to do month to month. Well, I'll get into that. I'm getting ahead of myself. I will get into that later. What are the summary of changes for those of us who have been in YTB contracts for many years? The highlight summary of changes are: there will no longer be a match required by districts, right? So in the past, districts had to put forth 1/3 of the cost and then go forth and do all the things, and then would reimburse on a quarterly basis or send in a bill and we would send you back some of your dollars and send some VR dollars. No longer is a match required by districts in this model. All pre-ETS reporting, invoicing, and payment are on a monthly schedule instead of quarterly. Prior approval is by VR is non-negotiable. This is one of the things that came out of our audit. I'll talk about that in just a moment, but that's something that we just can't get around. Districts may only bill for services provided to students being the operative word there, not to those who have dropped out, graduated, or otherwise disengaged. So pre-ETS are only for youngsters who are enrolled in school. There's no separate line item for staff, computer, phone, other staff-related supports. This becomes responsibility of the district. Once you get the dollars from your first reimbursement, you could use those dollars to purchase something like that if you wanted to. But it isn't a separate line item anymore in our contract. No longer will there be our massive contract spend downs that we used to do in the past. Payments will solely be for what's included in the scope of the contract. One more page of changes. Students must be eligible and have active IPE, individual plan for employment, with VR to get items that our grant used to cover. Things like clothing and items for interviews, work-based learning experiences, or course certification or licensing fees, transportation. So we may see more students going into plan if they need those things to access pre-ETS. Prior YTP and summer RFA are combined into one pre-ETS contract. It will require more administrative oversight to monitor billed services toward expected amount, to shift the model within your district or school if the previous model was addressing services required by schools, like any transition services or other things like that. It will require more from business offices and their personnel moving forward as we do monthly billing and payment instead of quarterly. There is a higher standard for supplemental documentation, evidence of service, mileage logs, receipts, etc. And after this very first round where we start July, then all of our future contracts will have an October 1 start date because we needed to align with the federal fiscal year. So that's something new too. Another little pause here for questions, writing down your question. All right. Why? Why on earth would we make all these changes? You've heard it before if you've been following along for the last couple of years. If you are brand new and just joining us, vocational rehabilitation was monitored by the federal government in 2022 for the first time since 2008. And we had really significant findings around these contracts in particular, as well as a couple of other contracts. So all of the things that we're putting into place they're not optional. This is the only way that we can move forward with a contract for Pre-ETS. And each step of the way, we've been working with our technical assistance folks and our federal oversight team, proposing would this work, and they ping back, how about this? And we propose something, and then they have this feedback, or they have encouragement for something. But where we've landed, they have given us the green light for this contract. So they like where we've gone with this. It's hard on all of us, but if we keep services to students and the ability to get services to the most students in our minds, then these growing pains, I believe, are worth it. So above and beyond just having a finding that made us change all of these, why do we want to continue offering contracts in general? We have a shared responsibility for transition services. We have a long celebrated, strong history of partnership with our schools and VR, and we really, really want that to stay in place. And Pre-ETS, we just have to, we have to start documenting how we're spending all of our dollars in a much more targeted way. But we believe that teamwork is really the only way forward. No matter what, it's a lot for us, and we know that it's a lot for you, and that we just want to state honestly and vulnerably that there is an interdependence at play here. We really do want to stay in partnership with schools, and we want to find a way to make this work. So as we get into questions about the contract, whether they might be today or they might be after the fact, in a more kind of like one-on-one setting with your youth services coordinator, just know that we don't have it all figured out yet. This is our first contract to ever look like this. And we're committed to learning alongside with you to try and make work. Who can apply for this new Pre-ETS contract? Any public school district which serves 14 to 21-year-olds in Oregon, any education service district in Oregon, right? So we're opening it up to new sites, places that once had YTP and stepped away, places that have never had YTP. But at this point in time, we are keeping it to public school entities only. That gives us the ability to access that ORS 190 and do direct appoint. It was just one less hurdle for the time being amidst all of this change. What is our timeline for getting this Pre-ETS contract out? It's a fast timeline, everybody. It is fast. We've been sprinting. So we are, if you look at this timeline, right now we're in the middle of what we're calling our winter regional training series. And this is for current contract holders to begin implementing all of these changes with us April 1, kind of like a practice quarter before everything becomes real in July. So that's happening right now. And when we step over to the right, February 26th, that's us today, contract information session. One more to the right, Each Monday in March, we're going to hold office hours for Q&A. If you have questions about this, if you want to bring some other people into the conversation, we will be here for you to answer questions, and those are virtual. March 13th, which is the day before OSTC, separate from OSTC, but still at the graduate for everyone's convenience. We hope we all see it that way. We're doing a second round of training of the winter regionals training. It's just a second dose for people who would like to or would benefit from hearing all of this information one more time, because it is a lot. And then we have actual OSTC the 14th and 15th. During OSTC, we're having a session that will be a little bit of a pared down repeat of what we're going over today. And then March 25th, everybody needs to write this date down, is the day that we need your applications back to us. So this is only 1 month, everybody, and I'm sorry, but we have been moving just as quickly as we can, and we've got to get all of your information, your information into the Office of Contracts and Procurement at the state of Oregon, because it takes them that long. We have to have everything signed by the end of June for them to start July 1. May, June, we have spring regionals. May 20th, we have another virtual training that's going to go much more in depth around payment and all of the payment and fiscal requirements that are outlined in the contract. People who are currently in contract with us, as well as people who want to learn about that, are invited to that session. The link and information will be on our website. And then June 30th, new contracts signed and good to go for July 1. I put this here one more time. I know it's redundant, but we are going to start, VR is going to start accepting applications for the Pre-ETS contract tomorrow, February 27th. We will have office hours March 4, 11, 18, and 25, 3:30 to 4:30 virtually. Q&A for you, questions that you have. You can always, outside of these office hours, contact your youth service coordinator or Francie Detweiler. And you can probably still call me, but I might route you toward them. Interested districts will need to have required materials submitted to VR by March 25th. And we'll show you how in just a moment. Fiscal components training on May 20th for all districts who've submitted requests to the contract, and all of them in contract with us. And then all of the contracts must be signed by both VR and the school districts by June 30th. No retroactive dates allowed. We've done a lot of retroactively dating things because it's allowable in certain circumstances. This is not going to be one of those circumstances. So having that signed by June 30th to start July 1 is a requirement that we cannot get around. Okay, so how do we apply? How do we apply? We're going to try and keep it quite simple. Oops, once again, I'm going to add that screenshot before we put it online. You will go to our website, link right here. There will be a nice big button that says apply for a Pre-ETS contract here. And you're going to click on that. And it's going to be a form that you fill out. And we want the name and contact information of the contract administrator. That's going to be the person who will supervise the work of the contract. We want the name and contact of the contract clerk. That's a weird name, but we had to name role specific things when we built the dashboard so that we could build in all of the communication features. So whoever your business office person is that you want to be the contact, that's who you would put in as contract clerk. And then we want the name and title of the person or people who will provide Pre-ETS if known, and the school districts where you're requesting to provide Pre-ETS. So if we have like an ESD that's hoping to serve a whole big area, and then we have one little district who is in the middle, and we may have to, we're going to watch for that and make sure that we're coordinating in regions to make sure that there's good solid plans in place. And we encourage you to coordinate outside of us with these conversations. about who applies. Okay, then you're just going to have a couple of attachments. There's going to be a summary sheet, and the summary sheet is going to include the number of students that you may be able to potentially provide. And it's laid out on the summary sheet. So it's how many students with an IEP, 504, or otherwise documented disability that you know of, for a total number of students that might be able to receive services. We want to know how you're envisioning implementing the contract. Are you going to employ staff whose main purpose is to provide the pre-ETS? Or are you going to use staff with multiple duties to provide the pre-ETS? And if so, what's their title and other job duties? We actually, the budget narrative, we built that into the summary sheet. So the budget narrative is actually part of the summary sheet now. And what we're asking for here is for you to plan ahead for VR in service for fall of 24 and fall of 25. 5 quarterly regional in-person events. So we're thinking about getting into a rhythm with all of our sites regionally, where quarterly we're in person and monthly we're virtual or something like that. But we want to be able to plan for up to 5 in person if needed. The OSTC Conference 2025 next spring. A general description of anticipated travel required to carry out coordination and provision of pre-ETS throughout the life of the contract, and how you arrived at the number included on the budget sheet. So we've got a couple of, we've been playing with a contract like this with a handful of our ESDs. And what they did is they just looked at their past year or biennium of travel. So they used their prior numbers or an average of the last 3 years, maybe numbers, to come up with what they thought would be appropriate for this amount right here. And that seems to be working really well for everybody. And that would be a great approach for you to take. And then supplies and also student wages. So the form walks you through each of these different things. Again, with the supplies, you're not talking about like computers or the phones even or anything for staff. What we're talking about is student supplies. Of course, we don't know what those are really yet. So give yourself a cushion. They'll all be things that are approved by VR for a specific student use along the way. It just makes the process faster, actually. And then if you're planning to pay students, we want to know the wage you're going to pay them, how many students, how many hours, and what's the general setup of that program look like. Then there's a budget sheet. It's very, very simple. We're asking you to indicate the number of hours that you're requesting in the contract. It is filled out so that it'll calculate for you. Anticipated travel costs, anticipated supplies, and then again, the anticipated amount for paid work-based learning experiences. The 40 and 60% that'll calculate for you. Where can we access support if we have questions? Kind of more like a who. Oh, it's not updated. Our website's going to be updated in the morning, everybody. In the morning with all of the updated things. But here is our youth contracts team. Again, CJ Webb is the northwest corner. Derek Hill is the central north area. Desiree Berry is central and eastern Oregon. Michelle Pruden, southern Oregon over to the coast. And the Mid-Valley, I call it Mid-Valley, Lincoln, Benton, Lynn, and Lane in recruitment currently. That's for all your programming and authorized and service questions. And then Francie is statewide, and she's budget and numbers, questions, and support. Change is never easy, but it's always possible. I love this quote, and I sometimes don't love this quote, but I do believe in it. All right, I'm going to stop recording, and then we can have questions. If I can figure out how to stop recording. There we go.